Okay, so first, when you are setting out to draw your still life, consider what way around your paper is going, and just for the purpose of this video I'm going to make it landscape, but of course you might decide to make your drawing portrait, and this one I'm going to draw could work portrait as well because it's got a little bit of height to it, but I'm going to do it landscape because that also works. And don't forget, you can always, you know, change things slightly, but just really think about where it's going to go on the page, and also think about whether, you know, is it paper that you can crop down? So does it matter too much? Can you crop the paper down later on? You don't want to be really cropping it down to any kind of dodgy shapes. You want it to kind of fit generic A4 or A3, something like that, or a square even. But sometimes anything in between that can look a bit weird. So deciding on where it's going to go on the page, my page ends around about here, but I've got to think about also rule of the third, so whether I want like a taller object to go here. So in this case I've got this tomato ketchup bottle, which I kind of want to have going across this third of the page, and then everything else coming across here. So I kind of want it in this sort of L shape. It will be more flattering, more aesthetically pleasing. So I might even break those shapes down so simply that I can just do a line for where I want the shape to be. So maybe I want that ketchup bottle to be there. I'm also just making sure it's going to fit on my page. I've got a bit of space around everything. That's not to say that you can't do things super zoomed in and coming off of the page. That is another way that actually looks really cool, rather than just having it like more of a traditional still life. So if I want maybe the centre of that sweet corn to be around about there, and then I want that pistachio to be around about there. So now I can really assess how this is working, just with 3 very simple lines shape-wise. You know, do I want all this blank space over here and here? You know, you've got to think about that and just make a decision. But it's fitting nicely with rule of the third. So if you do want to think about, you know, that kind of method, if you really think you're not sure about how you want something, stick with a rule, but you do not have to stick to the rules. So now I'm kind of happy with that. I could obviously rub it out if I wanted to really easily. I've not really done much. I've just done really, really, really light lines. Now I can think more about the very, very rough shapes. I'm not even necessarily thinking about 3D yet. So that ketchup, I'm just thinking about really how wide it is and where it will end. I might change these later. So also this, yes, this is going to be a cylinder, but I'm coming up with the most basic form of where that shape is. And again with this, also looking at the angles of things. So I'm looking, of course, that goes straight up. What angle does that top of the pistachio bag kind of meet? Somewhere around there. And I'm always looking back and forward, so I'm constantly looking in my photo between this and this. What is this angle like? So from the top of the ketchup bottle to the bottom, have I got that angle right? No, I don't think I have. So either that's out too far, or that needs to go up a little bit. I've kind of maybe got to get that angle right first, so maybe that might be right, and then check this angle. It actually is that out of place. When I look at this space here, that's not right, so I need to change that. So that might actually fix that. Now that seems more like it, so I can get my rubber. I don't want to be distracted by that. You don't really need to rub out. You can leave those there and just deal with them later, but I'm just going to try and figure out what actually I'm trying to keep and not. So that's looking a little bit more like it. Of course, that comes across there. I am going to make this look very slightly cuboid-like, but it's a very wonky cuboid because of, you know, just the shape of the bag. So that's looking like a very wonky cuboid. And now I'm just really assessing, are they right compared to each other? So we can also test the length. So if I'm looking at that image, I'm going to see what does the length of that match up with anything. So in my actual photo, the length, so even if my picture's tiny, does the length of the ketchup bottle, even if it's tiny, match up with anything else? So it actually should, that length should match up with this length here, which it kind of does actually. I think something about that is a little bit too long, or maybe it is the length of the ketchup bottle. I probably will, by the time I end up rounding off the edges, it probably will change slightly. Actually, this may need to come down. So yeah, if I look at where the top of that pistachio packet ends there, somewhere around the middle where the sweet corn is, actually that is similar to where the top of the ketchup lies. So actually that ketchup bottle needs to come down a little bit. So that would make a little bit more sense. So that should be lining up with that a little bit better, which is right. So this first stage is really, really, really important. See, I haven't got very far at all, but this is important. You cannot just start drawing a ketchup bottle and then expecting everything else to fall into place, because it just isn't going to work like that. You really have to stick to this if you want to be getting that right. Even if you're tracing something, that's also fine, tracing and making sure everything's in the right place before you start shading. And there's nothing wrong with tracing, but of course it is handy, especially when drawing from life, to just know how to do these things, but you don't have to like prove it all the time. I often trace, especially if I'm doing like commissions or something. I don't always have time to, and I don't have to prove that I can draw freehand. So now I can start looking a bit more at this shape. Still the red ketchup bottle down here, but it's got this almost like a semi-sphere or something going on there. And then of course we've got sort of cylinder, so lots of cylinders here. So cylinder here, here. This is kind of like a cylinder in a way. And then that packet, yes, I've got this rough structure. I'm just picking up on any particular, I don't want to outline too much, or really at all. In fact, you can't see much really here because just, you know, it's a clear packet, so I'm really, really roughly kind of just trying to show. And again, look where I'm holding my pencil. I'm drawing really lightly still at this stage. I'm holding it right up here. I won't start holding it down here until I'm actually sort of shading in detail certain things. And of course I can see that through the pack slightly. There's something not quite right about this bit, but it does change a lot. And then of course you've got these individual pistachios. I think I need to get this a little bit more. Something about this isn't right, so I'm going to change. Much better off, it's kind of annoying that I have to change it, but I'm much better off doing this now. So I'm looking at how much of that do I see there. Actually the bag is a lot more open than I kind of initially thought. It actually opens around about there. There is this angle here, which usually you would expect for a cuboid for it to go straight down like that from this angle, but the packet, the nature of that packet is kind of just like this, and then you've got all these pistachios just spilling out. So, you know, does it matter if I get one pistachio out of place? To be honest, not really. I'm not really worrying too much about getting those exactly right, although maybe I should. but honestly it's not going to matter. I could easily move them purposely if I didn't like where one was, for example. One. There's one over there. I might actually skip some of them out. And this is just, you know, this is a nice way to draw the eye around the page. I haven't quite got my whole page in this screen. It goes a little bit further down. But yeah, now it's starting to come along a bit better. And because I haven't got any final lines, it doesn't matter too much. Remember with the things like labels, they also need to follow this curve. You can't just then go and draw just a straight rectangle. In this case, kind of recedes into the bottom, so actually it is pretty much straight on. I can't see from this angle the curve, because actually that part of the bottle is quite flat. Of course I can rub out any of my kind of original lines that I just used to roughly sketch things out first. And then before you start thinking about sketching in everything, you're just gradually building up this detail slowly and more looking for the darker tones. So if I look over at the image, either in front of me or the photo, I am looking at what is darker and lighter. This area, of course, the ketchup bottle is quite dark, but also that is kind of, when you squint your eyes, you can probably see things that just show up as being darker. So that whole area does look a little bit darker. And then of course, I don't want it to be too liney, so I'm really using the side of my pencil. See, I'm not shading like this. I'm really holding my pencil down here and shading using the side. There's of course still lots and lots more dark and light tones within the picture, but that is really plotting out to me where the darkest tones are. I'm still not worrying about the edges too much, especially with this packet, which is clear. This is actually not part of the packet, this is part of the surface, so you might also want to think about where your surface, you know, makes your still life look like it's sitting on something. I mean, that really is there, but sometimes it's always good to kind of make up that line. And again, it's always better to have it in one of those thirds. So this is in the top third, so you don't really want to have it in the middle. It's a little bit too central. It's more aesthetically pleasing on the eye if you go up here or maybe down there. Of course, it wouldn't be able to be down there because then the stuff wouldn't be sitting on anything. So that's always good, just to make it look like it's actually somewhere. And then we're going to just take a bit of, I've just got some toilet roll, which you might have a shortage of at the moment, but you might be alright. Just to smudge that. It's better to use this than your finger, just to save on making it greasy. But it's given me a nice base to work with, so rather than just having just a white background, it's a little bit nicer to work with something. And don't just smudge this around anywhere. I'm actually using, as you can see, I'm using my finger to smudge exactly where I want. I don't necessarily want to smudge everywhere. Because I've got a little bit left, I can actually use that to get any other mid-tones anywhere else where I think actually could do with a bit of shadow there, maybe on the side here. But it's gradually, really gradually starting to build up. You don't want to rush too much, and this will take a while. Which I've got on top of that can as well. And be careful not to use your fingers to kind of smudge everything out of the way, because you probably will drag some of the pencil around. So just literally lift up your piece of paper and blow it, or just wave it and get those little bits of rubber and stuff off. Now, I don't want this to actually look super kind of neat and like a fine drawing. I want it to look quite sketchy, so I'm going to keep it looking like that. I want to see that it's a pencil drawing. I'm quite confident that this area is quite dark, so actually the ketchup has got a label kind of on top of a label almost, so it's got this shape that goes around here. And that's showing me a little bit more now where those dark areas are. So I might go from smudging to actually sometimes just leaving the pencil as it is. So I'm going to just carry on adding those sort of more of those dark tones, building them up a little bit more. So around on the can here, think about the fact that it's a cylinder going from dark to light. But I'm really not going to try and be too perfect with this drawing. I don't want to spend too long on it. So as you can see here, I've really just put in suggestions of sweet corn. I'm not sitting there kind of drawing every single individual sweet corn. I'm just kind of drawing kind of slightly circular motions, but just random patches of dark where I see them. And here I'm kind of actually just drawing in the negative space that I see around the tomatoes, rather than, and even like this, I can just see a darker patch there. I don't think, oh, there's a red rectangle there. I just think, right, there's a darker rectangle, darker patch there. And of course this bit's quite darker here. And also use your directional lines to give that illusion, because I want it to look sketchy. I don't want it to all like look really, really neat and blended in. I want it to look sketchy and kind of unfinished in a way. I'm going to keep my lines looking quite, you know, they've got to be in the direction that they'll go. So if you are shading on the cylinder, then make sure that you are using these lines basically like hatching, but I don't want it to be too neat. And it does get a little bit darker around here, but sometimes it's just a case of shading in the gaps of things that kind of stick out. See, I'm not just going through drawing everything. I'm actually looking at the space around the sweet corn that looks darker. I'm not thinking, right, I'm going to draw an individual sweet corn. I'm just looking at the patches of dark space. And again, I'm really not worried about actually getting it too accurate. It gets a lot lighter here. And at some point I'll probably use a rubber just down here. I'll probably need to do it again later on, but I'll just show you where you might want to highlight. Get rid of that rubber line. When you compare that sweet corn tin and the ketchup, that should be a lot darker than this. So I know I'm gonna have to go in even more with this to make that look lighter, or I'll have to lighten this up. And one way I could lighten it up is by using my rubber, but rather than using it to just kind of you know, just rub everything out, I'm going to use it a bit like a highlighter, but I'm going to just use it kind of where each of the sweet corn pieces are. And for the background, which I could have done actually earlier when I was using the tissue to blend, it's a wooden table, so it's going to be quite liney, and of course it's going to be picked up a little bit more where there's shadow there. I'm still using that side of my brush, my pencil, sorry. But then I can use my toilet roll. You're not just going to rub over everything. You need to rub and actually really think about where you want the smudge. But just to give that slight wood effect, and I'll probably work into that even more, but you might get notches in the wood, or maybe your objects are on fabric or something, which can also look nice. You might get just a few ones in there, a few darker areas, and they're not going to be even or perfect. And actually it's a good idea to get this on before I start drawing the pistachio nuts. So I've just been going through a little bit and making that ketchup darker, and just to push it back a little bit. And then when we're working on these pistachios over here, where it's in the plastic, it's quite unclear, quite blurry, and so then it would be quite appropriate to use that tissue just to blur things out a little bit. And I'm really just looking, right, where are the dark areas, and quite often there's lots of little triangular shapes where the pistachios are kind of meeting. There is a little sort of label around here. Slightly, I can't really quite see the end of it, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. There's a pistachio here that I can see quite clearly that's just been pushed off against the edge of the plastic. And then I'm going to smudge, or kind of almost smudge and dab in a way, rather than just trying to smudge or smooth it out too much. I just want to kind of fuzz it a little bit. And when you look at the picture, I don't want to go around doing some kind of dark grey outline. You need to look carefully what looks lighter, this or the background. And the way I've drawn it so far, it kind of looks like they're the same, or that the background's lighter, but actually when you look at the image, this is a lot lighter than the background. So my background needs to be darker in order to pull this lighter, because I can't really get, I mean I can get rid of the shading, but I don't want to. It still needs to have this shadow and depth to it. In fact, I might have gone a little bit too dark with this shadow over here, but I'll just lighten it. But really, what needs to be darker is the background. So that's actually going to pick up on the edge, and this is probably going to be everywhere. You can see certain areas where the background does get lighter, but overall I really need to shade this background. And now that I've added that to that background, hopefully you can see how that's really brought out this packet here that is lighter than the background. And this is where you could also neaten up using your rubber, using it to kind of highlight. And as you can probably tell, I've changed where the table ends, because it was kind of halfway down the picture and I just wanted it to be in the top third, but it hasn't really affected anything, any of my work. It hasn't affected the objects at all, it's just literally that line's changed. And so as you can see, I've still got some work to do, a lot in this area, and putting in the text. And also I just wanted to say that I wanted to pick up on maybe a few of the pistachio nuts as my main pieces of detail. So if you're doing that, then that's when you do just really want to take your time more and draw those things a little bit more carefully. So just a few, because I want it to be clear what they are, but maybe for people to have to look a little bit closer, they can basically see, you know, in a little bit more detail a few things. So whatever you're drawing in detail is going to stand out a little bit more. So often in the foreground it would make sense, but sometimes you might decide to draw focus to something in the background, which is also fine. So whatever you don't want to draw focus to, maybe you want it to be in the distance, then don't draw that in as much detail. Let it fade out and look a bit fuzzier, a bit blurrier in the background. And then whatever you're trying to draw in detail, just really, really take your time on that. Use a sharp pencil if you need to. You don't want to get carried away sort of outlining things as such, but you just want to be extra neat about what you're drawing and really picking up on exact shapes of things. So the way that this is kind of rounder here, and it's even got this little bit that pokes out on this side. I'm just paying attention really to the shape of what I'm drawing, at least sometimes with some things. And they've really got a lot of depth to the shadow here. And as you can see over here, I really darkened up this area. I'm just showing you with an HB, but if you do have any other drawing pencils like 4Bs, 2Bs, or maybe even something like a 9B, then the bigger that number, the darker it's going to be. So if I wanted to get really, really dark here, I would use something like a 6B, and I could get really, really dark tones there. But you do want to have that mixture of the dark and the light, just to give it more of that volume and depth. And just a little tip, if you are drawing something like this, to draw and kind of sketch out the shapes, but remember, in between those kind of oval shapes is the shadow, so don't forget to shade in that shadow. And actually really the shadow is the main part that you're actually drawing, but of course sometimes you need to just have that first bit there just to show you what it is, where where you're actually shading. I haven't quite managed to do any of the detailed pistachios yet, but I'll probably do that soon, or maybe once I've done this I'll kind of see which ones I really want to focus on. When you're adding something like text, you can literally, the things that are big enough to write in, you can write them like that, but where there's tiny little writing down here, you kind of just want to do lots of, there's 2 rows, but again, it's like, does it matter? Do you need to do exactly the same? You kind of just want to draw lots of little lines. I'm not even thinking about what it is it says, I can't even read it. But it's just kind of lots of little dots and dashes of different sizes, and think about having gaps between them. I've missed out the Tesco just because I found I didn't quite have enough space for it, and I've probably somewhere down the line not left enough space, but I could either fix it by rubbing it out and kind of changing it, but if someone's just looking at this, they're probably not going to know much different. And now that sweet corn wraps around, some of it is hidden, so I'm going to still write it very, very lightly, because I'm aware that I might, run out of space or something. And think about that curve as well, you still need to remember that. And just the biggest thing to pay attention to is whether it's light or dark. So, is that text dark, or is it light? You see a little bit of something here, and then like that ketchup bottle, you've got that sort of darker space. And it does actually have white writing in, so you could always try rubbing stuff out, but I think I might end up just smudging more than rubbing anything out. But if you've got one of those really fine rubbers, then that would be handy. And then I've got some smaller text down there. It's just a squiggle really, just to show that it's got some sort of label there. But like I said, this is really still a kind of rough sketch that it will still take a while. But you can imagine that if you wanted to do this in as much detail as possible, then it would take a lot of hours, several hours at least, to complete a drawing like this. And this is only A4. So I'm just going to move that slightly. So really focus on maybe little shadows just that are going to make things look more 3D. directional lines to show the form of that shape. These pistachios do have these little lines that kind of show the direction that they're sitting in. And I only really want that for a few. I'm not going to do that for everything. Just slightly pay a bit more attention to the shapes of a few of them. I remember sometimes it's the shadow around objects that give them their shape, not necessarily that the object itself has a line around it. And just have a general look around. Have you missed any shadows? Because that's really important in showing whether something is 3D or not. Any highlighting that you can do to finish with. So maybe like on the top of the can here. Again, I really haven't done this in much detail either. I'm just getting the rough idea of it. Things along here. And not forgetting this bit up here of the ketchup where the sauce ends. It's quite a full bottle, but it's just got a jaggedy edge of where the sauce is kind of like dripped down from the bottom or top, depends which way around you have the ketchup. And then you can always go in again with more if it wasn't quite right. In the first place, and you also, there's a little bit of a highlight. And don't forget to spray when you're done, but this would also look really nice if you could do a few things with this after. With your rough sketch, you could do something like photocopy it onto cartridge paper or onto some sort of firmer paper, and then you could paint onto it. So you could use it as a base for something like an acrylic painting or watercolour, or you could even try something like, I think this really would look nice in charcoal, just to get a little bit more depth with those darker tones, because there's only so much you can really do. With the HB, you're going to get something fairly grey looking. So really, ideally, you want to add in kind of like a stronger B pencil, like I said, a 9B, 6B or something like that, just to get those really, really dark tones.